Let's go through this one more time, Mrs. Moore, Detective Harrison said, his voice weary with the late hour. The fluorescent lights of the police station interrogation room cast harsh shadows across his face, making the bags under his eyes more pronounced. I sat perfectly still, back straight, hands folded neatly on the metal table, a posture of composure I'd practiced throughout my 15-year marriage to the district attorney. It's Ms. Chen now, actually. I reverted to my maiden name after the divorce. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The detective's pen paused mid-note, a flicker of annoyance, crossing his features. Right. Ms. Chen, you maintain you had no knowledge of the documents found in your home office? It wasn't my office, I corrected gently. That room was Richard's private study. I respected his space, even after he moved out 6 months ago. Yet you had access to it. Technically, yes. The house is still in both our names until the divorce is finalized next month. I kept my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning beneath my calm exterior. But I had no reason to enter his study. Richard made it very clear during our marriage that his work files were confidential. Attorney-client privilege. Detective Harrison leaned back, metal chair creaking under his weight. So you expect me to believe that somehow, without your knowledge, evidence from 3 of your ex-husband's highest-profile cases, evidence that was reported missing from the DA's office, just happened to end up hidden in your shared home? Humorless smile touched my lips. No, Detective. I expect you to consider that Richard Moore, a man who prosecuted criminals for 20 years, might know exactly how to frame someone. My mind drifted to that morning, how ordinary it had begun. I'd been in the kitchen completing the final draft of my dissertation, a PhD in forensic psychology that Richard had always dismissed as my little hobby. The irony wasn't lost on, the banging on my front door had startled me. 3 officers with a search warrant, Harrison among them, pushing past me with practiced efficiency. We have reason to believe evidence from active criminal cases is being stored on these premises, he'd explained, handing me the document with Richard's signature bold at the bottom. I'd watched in stunned silence as they methodically moved through, the house eventually converging on Richard's study. The hollow space behind the vintage law books on the 3rd shelf, books I'd given him as a wedding present, yielded exactly what they were looking for: a sealed evidence bag containing a bloodied knife, case files with pages clearly removed, and a USB drive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You understand how this looks, Harrison continued, bringing me back to the present interrogation. Your ex-husband is a respected district attorney. You're in the middle of what I understand is an increasingly acrimonious divorce. The missing evidence could compromise 3 major convictions he secured. And destroy his career, I added. Which is precisely why Richard would never be so careless as to hide evidence in his own home, unless he meant for it to be found. I leaned forward, slightly. Tell me, Detective, who tipped you off about the evidence in our house? Harrison's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Was it Richard? I pressed. The detective closed his notebook. We're done for now, Ms. Chen. Don't leave town. After they released me on my own recognizance, a small mercy likely due to my spotless record and position as an adjunct professor at the local university, I drove home in a state of numb disbelief. Yellow police tape crisscrossed Richard's study door. The rest of the house eerily undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. I moved mechanically through my evening routine, mind racing. Richard had always been calculating, meticulous in his planning. During our marriage, I'd admired these qualities, the way he could see 10 steps ahead in any situation. Now, that same strategic mind had turned against me. Setting my tea on the kitchen counter, I opened my laptop and began typing. Richard Moore frame job. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before I deleted the words. Of course, Richard would have anticipated this. He'd expect me to panic, to search frantically for answers online, leaving an easily traceable digital footprint. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind I used for taking research notes, and began writing by hand. At the top of the page, I wrote, Motive. Why would Richard risk his reputation to frame me? The divorce had been his idea. He'd fallen for a younger legal assistant in his office, Veronica, with her sleek blonde hair and law degree from Harvard. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted upon before our wedding ensured he'd keep most of his assets. I'd never been interested in his money anyway. So what was I missing? My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, May. Just saw Richard at the Capitol Grill with Judge Sullivan. Thought you should know. I stared at the message, something clicking into place. Judge Sullivan was presiding over an upcoming murder trial, State vs. Donovan, one of Richard's most high-profile cases. Donovan was the son of one of the wealthiest developers in the city, accused of murdering his girlfriend in a jealous rage. The case had dominated local headlines for months, and Richard was having dinner with the judge. Highly improper, potentially. Grounds for a mistrial if revealed. Had I unwittingly learned something I shouldn't have? I racked my brain, trying to recall any casual conversations, any documents I might have glimpsed. Richard had always been careful to keep his work and home life separate. Or so I'd thought. Another text from May lit up my screen. You okay? Haven't heard from you today. I hesitated, then responded, Fine. Busy with dissertation revisions. Talk. Tomorrow? I couldn't risk telling anyone what had happened, not yet. Not until I understood what game Richard was playing. Setting my phone face down on the counter, I turned back to my notebook. Under motive, I wrote, Hide improper relationship. With Judge Sullivan? Cover up evidence tampering in Donovan case? Create distraction from something else? A sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I froze, heart pounding against my ribs. The police had already taken what they came for. Who could be at my door at 11 p.m.? Through the peephole, I recognized Richard's brother, James. Unlike Richard, with his perpetually pressed suits and slicked-back hair, James looked disheveled, his tie loosened and eyes bloodshot. I hesitated before unlocking the door, opening it just enough to look at him. What are you doing here, James? He glanced nervously over his shoulder at the empty street. Can I come in? Please, Emily, it's important. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. James had always been kind to me, the softer of the Moore brothers. While Richard climbed the ranks of the district attorney's office with ruthless ambition, James had built a modest practice focusing on immigration law, often taking cases pro bono. The brothers hadn't spoken in months, their relationship strained by what James called Richard's ethical flexibility. I heard what happened, James said, pacing my living room. The search, the evidence. Richard's telling everyone you stole case files to sabotage him after he left you. And you believe him? I kept my voice neutral, watching James closely. He stopped pacing, meeting my eyes directly. No, I don't. That's why I'm here. For the first time since the police had barged into my home that morning, I felt a flicker of hope. Go on. James lowered his voice, though we were alone in the house. Richard came to me 6 weeks ago asking questions about offshore accounts, ways to move money without leaving a trail. I thought it was for a case. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. But then I overheard him on the phone last week, talking about securing the package and making arrangements for transfer after the Donovan verdict. You think he's taking bribes, I said, pieces starting to fit together. James nodded grimly. The Donovan family is worth billions. They'd pay anything to keep their son out of prison. But the evidence against Donovan is overwhelming, I pointed out. Even with a compromised judge, how could Richard ensure an acquittal? By tampering with the evidence, James replied, or making the evidence inadmissible. If key pieces of evidence were found to have been handled improperly, like being removed from the evidence locker and hidden in the DA's ex-wife's home, I finished, the full scope of Richard's plan becoming horrifyingly clear. Exactly. With the chain of custody broken, the defense could move to have it thrown out. Without that evidence, the prosecution's case, Richard's case, falls apart. Sank onto the couch, mind reeling. And if Donovan walks, Richard collects his payoff. But why frame me specifically? Why not just have the evidence disappear completely? James sat beside me, voice dropping even lower. Because Richard needs a scapegoat, someone with access to his home, with a motive for revenge, and, this is key, someone with a background in forensic psychology who might plausibly be interested in his cases. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. 15 years of marriage, and Richard had weaponized every intimate detail he knew about me. My dissertation, my access to our home, even my hurt over his infidelity and abandonment. You need to be careful, Emily, James warned. Richard has friends throughout the department. It's why I came tonight instead of calling. I don't trust that your phones aren't being monitored. Why are you helping me? I asked. The question that had been nagging since he arrived. He's your brother. James's expression hardened. Because I've watched Richard hurt people for years, justifying it as upholding the law. But this... He shook his head. This crosses a line I can't ignore, and because you deserve better. After James left, extracting a promise from me not to confront Richard, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the notebook before me. Under evidence needed, I began a new list. Proof of Richard Sullivan meetings. Financial records showing unusual transactions communications about Donovan case, evidence timeline of evidence tampering. The last item gave me pause. I didn't have access to the police evidence locker or the DA's office. How could I possibly trace when and how Richard had removed the evidence? But I did have access to something else. Our home security system. The one Richard had insisted on installing 3 years ago, with cameras covering every entrance and motion sensors throughout the ground floor. The system that stored footage on a cloud server I'd helped set up because Richard's technical skills ended at using the microwave. I pulled my laptop closer, accessing the security company's website. Richard had probably assumed I'd forgotten the password, or that I wouldn't think to check the footage. A small, grim smile formed on my lips as I logged in successfully. For a man who prided himself on anticipating every move, Richard had made a critical miscalculation. He'd underestimated me. Just as he always had. The footage library loaded, organized by date and camera location. I scrolled back to the week before. The police search, methodically working backward. Hours of nothing, empty rooms, occasional glimpses of me moving through the house. Then, 3 days before the search, at 2:17 a.m., movement at the back door. I leaned closer to the screen, watching as a figure entered using a key. Richard, dressed in dark clothing, carrying a small duffel bag. He moved with purpose through the kitchen, down the hallway, disappearing into his study. 27 minutes later, he emerged empty-handed and exited the same way he'd come in. My pulse quickened. I downloaded the video file to a secure cloud drive, then continued searching. 2 more nocturnal visits followed the same pattern. Richard, entering in the early morning hours, spending time in his study, leaving without the bag. I sat back, mind racing. The footage proved Richard had accessed the house recently, contradicting his statement to Detective Harrison that he hadn't been back since moving out. But it wasn't enough to prove he'd planted evidence. What I needed was leverage, something that would make Richard back off his plan before the Donovan trial began next week. And for that, I needed to access information from places Richard would never expect me to look. My gaze drifted to the kitchen ceiling. to the barely visible outline of the attic access panel. During our marriage, Richard had designated the attic as storage for his pre-Emily life, college memorabilia, files from his early cases, family documents he claimed held no sentimental value but couldn't bring himself to discard. In 15 years, I'd been up there exactly twice, once to store Christmas decorations and once to retrieve Richard's birth certificate for a passport renewal. Richard, always forward-looking, never considered the past worth revisiting, which made it the perfect place to start looking for his secrets. The wooden ladder creaked as I ascended into the darkness, smartphone flashlight illuminating decades of dust. Cardboard boxes lined the rafters, each labeled in Richard's precise handwriting: law school, family photos, case files, 2001-2005. I moved carefully between the boxes, searching for anything that might help me understand the man who had shared my bed for 15 years while apparently harboring capabilities I'd never fully comprehended. The man who now wanted to destroy me. Near the back, partially hidden behind a broken desk lamp, sat a metal lockbox I didn't recognize. No label, just a simple key lock, the kind easily picked with the right tools. Or, I realized, reaching for a hairpin, the wrong tools used the right way. The skills I'd learned researching lock mechanisms for my dissertation chapter on burglary psychology were about to serve a purpose Richard had never anticipated. As the lock clicked open under my improvised pick, a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Another detail from my academic work Richard had dismissed as useless, now potentially my salvation. Inside the box lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Richard's handwriting. Not case notes or legal strategy, but personal entries dating back nearly 20 years. I felt a twinge of guilt at this invasion of privacy, quickly overshadowed by the need for self-preservation. Richard had brought war to my doorstep. I couldn't afford moral quandaries about reading his diary. The earliest entries chronicled his rise through the DA's office, his strategic cultivation of relationships with judges and police officials. Increasingly, the entries referenced arrangements and understandings with defense attorneys, witnesses who became suddenly unreliable, evidence that unfortunately couldn't be located. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was reading. A methodical record of corruption spanning nearly 2 decades. Cases fixed, evidence manipulated, justice perverted, all recorded in Richard's meticulous hand, as if he needed to document his cleverness even when no one else would see it. And there, in entries from the past 3 months, explicit references to the Donovan case, meetings with the defendant's father, discussions of offshore payment structures, plans to ensure key evidence would be ruled inadmissible. April 15th. Met with D. Sr. At cabin. Final arrangement. 2M initial deposit. 3M upon acquittal. Non-negotiable. Made it clear failure not an option. May 10th. Sullivan on board. Promised support for federal bench nomination. Arrangements made for evidence problem. Need plausible suspect. E. Perfect candidate given background. E. Emily. Me. I photographed key pages with shaking hands, careful to maintain the exact order and position of everything in the box. If Richard discovered I'd found his journal, my advantage would evaporate instantly. Descending from the attic, I felt strangely calm. The shock and confusion of the morning had crystallized into cold clarity. Richard had built his career on corruption while cultivating an image of righteous prosecutor. He'd used me as convenient cover for his respectability, then discarded me when I no longer served his purposes. Now he planned to sacrifice me entirely, destroying my reputation and possibly sending me to prison to protect his illegal earnings. I wouldn't let that happen. At my laptop, I created an encrypted folder and uploaded the journal photographs and security footage. Then I composed a detailed timeline of Richard's activities based on both his journal entries and the security recordings. Patterns emerged: regular meetings with Judge Sullivan, visits to a lake cabin registered to a shell company, calls to a Cayman Islands number on the same day each month. The picture was damning but incomplete. I needed more. Hard evidence linking Richard directly to the Donovans, proof of financial transactions, recordings or emails that would substantiate the journal entries. For that, I'd need access beyond what I currently had. As dawn broke over the city, I made coffee and formulated a plan. Richard had taught me, unwittingly, the fundamentals of building a case: evidence, motive, opportunity. Now I would apply those lessons against him. My phone vibrated with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. Today. About Richard. Meet me at Riverside Park, North Entrance, 10 a.m. Come alone. VV Veronica." Richard's girlfriend. The woman he'd left me for. Why would she want to meet? Was it a trap? Another piece in Richard's elaborate scheme? Or did she, too, have information I needed? Only one way to find out. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that projected confidence and composure. A tailored blazer, dark jeans, low heels that wouldn't impede movement if I needed. To leave quickly. In my bag, I placed a small digital recorder and my notebook. Whatever Veronica wanted, I would be prepared. As I locked the front door behind me, I noticed a sedan parked across the street, its driver suspiciously still. Surveillance, almost certainly. Richard wouldn't leave anything to chance. I smiled, directly at the car as I walked to my own vehicle. Let them watch. Let Richard think I was rattled, desperate, making mistakes. The underestimated opponent is always the most dangerous, another lesson from Richard's own playbook. The game had begun, and while Richard thought he held all the cards, I had just found his hidden ace. Now I needed to play it perfectly. Riverside. Park sprawled along the water's edge, morning joggers and dog walkers dotting its winding paths. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a bench with clear sightlines in all directions. The sedan that had been watching my house was nowhere to be seen, but that didn't mean I wasn't being followed. I activated the recording app on my phone, sliding it into my blazer pocket. Whatever Veronica wanted to discuss, I needed documentation, Precisely 10 a.m., a slender blonde in oversized sunglasses approached my bench. Veronica Harris looked different from the photos I'd seen on Richard's phone, more tired, less polished. The designer handbag hanging from her arm couldn't disguise the nervous energy radiating from her. "Emily?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded once, gesturing to the space beside me. She sat, maintaining a careful distance. "Thank you for coming," she began, removing her sunglasses. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "I wasn't sure. You would." "Curiosity is a powerful motivator," I replied evenly. "Why did you want to meet?" Veronica glanced around, scanning nearby faces before leaning closer. "Richard is dangerous. More dangerous than I realized when I—" She trailed off, color rising to her cheeks. "When you started sleeping with my husband?" I finished for her, keeping my tone clinical rather than accusatory. She flinched. "I deserve that. But this isn't about us. It's about what Richard is involved in. The Donovan case." Her eyes widened. "You know?" "I know Richard is planning to throw the case in exchange for money from the Donovan family," I said carefully, watching her reaction. "And that he's using me as his scapegoat." Veronica's shoulders slumped in what looked like relief. "Then you understand why I needed to warn you. Richard isn't just planning to frame you, he's going to make sure you're convicted. He has officers in his pocket who are prepared to testify they saw you entering the evidence room at the courthouse. Last month." My stomach tightened. "That's impossible. I've never been to the evidence room." "It doesn't matter. They'll swear they saw you, that you used your connection to Richard to gain access." She twisted her hands in her lap. "The security camera for that hallway was malfunctioning that day. Convenient, right?" "Why are you telling me this?" I studied her face, searching for signs of deception. You left your job at a prestigious law firm to work for Richard. You're sleeping with him. What do you gain by betraying him? Veronica's laugh held no humor. You think I'm still with Richard? I ended things 3 weeks ago when I realized what he was doing with the Donovan case. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises around her wrist. He didn't take it well. I fought to keep my expression neutral. During our marriage, Richard had never been physically violent, but his anger had always simmered beneath a veneer of control. Had I simply never pushed him far enough to see what Veronica had experienced? I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. But that doesn't explain why you're risking meeting me. Richard won't react any better to this betrayal. Because I made copies of documents before I left, she said, voice hardening. Emails between Richard and Robert Donovan discussing consulting fees, notes about which evidence needed to disappear from the chain of custody, a draft of Judge Sullivan's jury instructions that all but guarantees reasonable doubt. Hope flared in my chest, quickly tempered by suspicion. If you have all this evidence, why not take it to the police yourself, or the State Bar Association? Because half the department is in Richard's pocket, and the Bar Association moves too slowly. By the time they acted, the evidence against you would be discovered in another location, making you look even more guilty. She leaned forward. But mainly because the documents alone aren't enough. We need the money trail. We? I was hired at my firm by Tom Jang. When the name didn't register, she clarified, Sandra Zhang's husband. The pieces clicked into place. Sandra Zhang had been Richard's biggest case 5 years ago, a pharmaceutical executive accused of knowingly concealing deadly side effects of a weight loss drug. The evidence against her had been overwhelming, until key testimony suddenly became inadmissible. She'd walked free. And 3 months later, Richard had purchased our vacation home in the Berkshires. I'd always wondered how we could afford it on his government salary. Tom hired me to find proof Richard was paid to throw Sandra's case, Veronica continued. I took the job in Richard's office to get close to him, to find evidence. I never expected... She looked away. I never expected to get involved with him. That wasn't part of the plan. But you did, I said flatly. Yes, and I've been trying to make up for it ever since. When I found evidence of what he was doing with Donovan, I contacted Tom immediately. He's been building a case against Richard for years, collecting testimony from other defendants who've paid for favorable outcomes. And where do I fit into this? I asked, still not fully trusting her story. You have access to Richard's personal records, his home, his past, and you have a psychological background that makes you perfectly positioned to anticipate his moves. Veronica reached into her handbag, withdrawing a business card. Tom wants to meet with you. He believes together we can bring Richard down before he can damage anyone else's life, including yours. I took the card, examining the embossed lettering. Thomas Jang, private investigator. So Sandra's husband had changed careers after his wife's trial. Think about it, Veronica said, rising from the bench. But don't take too long. The Donovan trial begins in 5 days, and Richard's timeline accelerates with each passing hour. She slipped her sunglasses back on. I'm staying at the Westridge Hotel under the name Lisa Campbell, room 412. Call the room directly when you decide. As Veronica walked away, I remained seated, turning the business card over in my fingers. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. Was Veronica telling the truth about working with Tom Jang? Or was this another of Richard's elaborate traps, using his mistress to lure me into making an incriminating move? I slipped the card into my pocket alongside my phone, ending the recording. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, but information that I desperately needed. And Thomas Jang seemed like someone with plenty to share. Instead of returning home, where Richard's surveillance might be waiting, I drove to the university library. The academic fortress of books and databases had been my sanctuary throughout. My doctoral studies, a place Richard rarely thought about. At a back table, hidden among the forensic psychology journals, I connected to the secure campus Wi-Fi and began my research. Tom Jang had indeed transitioned from corporate executive to private investigator after his wife's trial. His firm specialized in corporate malfeasance and legal corruption cases. Most importantly, he had no obvious connection to Richard that might suggest collusion. I turned next to the Donovan case, scanning news articles and legal filings. The paperwork, evidence against Jerome Donovan seemed overwhelming. His DNA under the victim's fingernails, security footage placing him near the scene, text messages threatening the victim hours before her death. Yet, key pieces, the knife with his fingerprints, the victim's phone containing the threatening texts, had reportedly gone missing from evidence last week. The timing aligned perfectly with Richard's nocturnal visits to our house. Using my academic credentials, I accessed financial databases tracking corporate structures. The cabin Richard mentioned in his journal was registered to Blue Lake Holdings LLC, a company that traced back through 3 shell corporations to an entity controlled by Donovan Developments, Robert Donovan's company. Finally, I searched for information on Richard's past cases, particularly those where crucial evidence had mysteriously become inadmissible or key witnesses had changed their testimony. A pattern emerged over 15 years. High-profile defendants with significant resources, walking free despite seemingly solid cases. In many instances, Richard's lifestyle had noticeably improved following these outcomes. New car, expensive vacations, our house renovations. The empirical evidence supported both Veronica's claims and the journal entries I'd discovered. Richard had been corrupting justice for profit throughout his career, using his reputation as a tough prosecutor to disguise his true activities. By late afternoon, my research complete, I made my decision. From a university phone, not my personal cell, I called the West Ridge Hotel and asked for Lisa Campbell's room. "Ms. Campbell, this is Dr. Martin from the laboratory," I said when Veronica answered. "I've reviewed your samples and would like to discuss the results. Are you available for dinner this evening? Say 7 p.m. at Osteria Matone?" There was a brief pause before Veronica caught on. "Yes, that would be fine, doctor. Thank you for calling." I hung up and gathered my materials, erasing my search history from the library computer. If Richard was monitoring Veronica's hotel room or phone, the innocuous medical call wouldn't raise suspicions. Osteria Matone, an Italian restaurant 20 miles outside the city, would provide privacy for our real conversation. Before leaving campus, I stopped by my faculty office retrieving a small fireproof safe hidden behind psychology textbooks. Inside lay documents I'd been gathering throughout my divorce proceedings. Financial records showing discrepancies between Richard's declared income and our lifestyle, notes about unexplained absences and suspicious phone calls, copies of checks, from legal consultations that never appeared on tax returns. I'd originally collected these materials to ensure a fair divorce settlement. Now they might help keep me out of prison. The drive to Osteria Matone took me through winding back roads, allowing ample opportunity to confirm I wasn't being followed. By the time I arrived at the rustic Italian restaurant nestled among pine trees, darkness had fallen, and I felt reasonably confident in my privacy. Veronica was already seated in a back corner, a glass of red wine before her. She'd changed into jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, a stark contrast to the polished legal assistant aesthetic she'd cultivated in Richard's office. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not here because I trust you," I clarified, ordering sparkling water from the hovering waiter. "I'm here because what you've told me aligns with evidence I've already gathered." Relief flickered across her features. "Then you believe me about Tom?" "I believe Tom Jang has motive to investigate Richard." Whether you're genuinely working with him remains to be seen. I removed a notebook from my bag. Before I agree to anything, I need to understand exactly what Richard is planning and what evidence you actually have. Over plates of handmade pasta that neither of us did more than pick at, Veronica outlined what she knew. Richard had been approached by Robert Donovan 6 months ago, shortly after Jerome's arrest. The initial offer was $1 million to ensure a favorable outcome. Richard had counteroffered with $5 million, negotiating down to $2 million up front and $3 million upon acquittal. The plan evolved over time, Veronica explained, voice low. Originally, Richard thought he could manipulate the evidence subtly, contamination concerns, chain of custody issues, but the DNA evidence was too solid and the investigating officers too thorough. So he needed a bigger disruption, I surmised, a scandal involving evidence directly connected to him. She nodded. When your divorce proceedings turned contentious, he saw an opportunity. The scorned ex-wife, desperate for revenge, with a psychology background that gave her interest in criminal cases. Except our divorce wasn't contentious until recently, I pointed out. Richard wanted out quickly and quietly. The prenup meant I had little to contest. Veronica's expression shifted. The contentious part was manufactured. Richard told me he deliberately prolonged proceedings, made unreasonable demands, canceled settlement meetings at the last minute, all to establish a pattern of animosity. That would make your revenge plausible. The calculated cruelty of it sent ice through my veins. While I'd been confused and hurt by Richard's increasingly hostile divorce tactics, he'd been methodically building his frame. What evidence do you actually have? I asked, refocusing on the practical matter at hand. Veronica reached into her bag, withdrawing a small USB drive. Emails, meeting notes, photos of Richard with Donovan and Sullivan at the lake house. Financial records showing transfers to offshore accounts registered to shell companies Richard controls. She placed it on the table between us. Not enough to arrest him outright, but enough to trigger a serious investigation, if it went to the right people. And what does Tom Jang want from me? Access to Richard's personal records. Anything connecting him directly to the evidence, in your house, or to the Donovan family. And she hesitated. Your testimony about Richard's unexplained income and activities during your marriage. I didn't reach for the USB. If I help, I become even more of a target. Richard would see my cooperation as confirmation of his narrative, the vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy him. You're already his target, Veronica countered. The frame is in motion. The only question now is whether you let it play out as he's planned or whether you fight back. The waiter approached with dessert menus, interrupting our tense exchange. We both declined, asking instead for the check. As we waited, I weighed my options. Cooperating with Jang meant becoming an active participant in Richard's downfall, potentially exposing myself to greater risk. But remaining passive meant allowing Richard's frame to tighten around me, eventually leading to my arrest and likely conviction. Richard was too thorough, too well connected to leave anything to chance. I need to meet Tom Jang directly, I decided. No intermediaries, no more secret messages. A face-to-face meeting where he can show me all the evidence he's collected, and exactly how he plans to use it. Veronica nodded. I'll arrange it. Tomorrow night? Not at the hotel, I specified. Somewhere public but private. And I'll need assurance that Richard won't know about it. There's a 24-hour diner near the airport, the Skyway. Truckers use it as a rest stop so new faces don't draw attention. 3 a.m. when it's quietest. The odd hour and location made sense, minimizing the chance of Richard's associates spotting us. I'll be there. As we left the restaurant, Veronica paused in the parking lot. Emily, there's something else you should know. She looked genuinely troubled. Richard has applied for a position with the federal prosecutor's office. If he gets it, his reach extends beyond local law enforcement. His contacts in the FBI would make building a case against him nearly impossible. When is the appointment decision? Next month, after the Donovan trial concludes. I processed this information, the stakes rising even higher. If Richard successfully framed me and secured the Donovan acquittal, his federal appointment would likely follow, placing him further from accountability and me closer to a prison cell. One last thing, Veronica said, reaching into her bag again. She handed me a prepaid phone. Use this to contact me from now on. Assume your personal devices are compromised. I took the phone, suddenly remembering the laptop I'd used to access the security footage. Had Richard installed monitoring software? It seemed like an obvious precaution he would take. Thank you for the warning, I said, my mind already racing ahead to what I needed to do next. I'll see you in Jang tomorrow night. We parted ways, driving in opposite directions from the restaurant. Instead of heading home, I pulled into a 24-hour big box store, purchasing a new laptop with cash and a cheap webcam. If Richard was monitoring my digital activities, I needed clean devices. In the store parking lot, I sat in my car considering my next move. The journal in Richard's lockbox contained damning information, but without context or corroboration, it could be dismissed as fabricated. I needed more. Documents linking him directly to the Donovans, evidence of the financial transactions, proof that he had planted evidence in our home. For that, I would need to return to the one place Richard believed I'd never dare go, his new apartment, where he now lived with Veronica's ghost. The luxury high-rise downtown represented everything. Richard aspired to prestige, security, exclusivity. During our marriage, he'd often commented on the building when we passed it, mentioning colleagues who lived there, noting the concierge service and private elevator access. When he'd moved out 6 months ago, his choice of residence had been predictable. What Richard didn't know was that I had a key. Not to his apartment specifically, but to the building's service entrance, obtained 3 months earlier when I'd volunteered for a charity event hosted in the building's common room. The maintenance supervisor, a kindly older man named Eduardo, had forgotten to retrieve it from me when the event ended. I'd kept it out of simple absent-mindedness, intending to return it the next time I was downtown. But after discovering Richard's affair, I'd held on to it, a small, petty act of defiance. Now that key might be my lifeline. From the store parking lot, I drove to a motel on the edge of town, paying cash for one night. Inside the anonymous room, I set up my new laptop and began planning my infiltration of Richard's apartment. I knew his schedule well enough to predict his movements. Early mornings at the gym, late nights at the office, especially with the Donovan trial approaching. Tomorrow, while Richard was in court for pre-trial motions, I would enter his building through the service entrance, take the freight elevator to his floor, and search his apartment for the evidence I needed. The risk was enormous, but so was the alternative, allowing Richard's frame to close around me unchallenged. I created a new, anonymous email account on my clean laptop and composed a message to myself, attaching the security footage showing Richard entering our house at night. I included detailed notes about the journal I'd found and Veronica's information about Richard's plan. If something happened to me, at least there would be a digital breadcrumb trail leading to the truth. As I prepared for bed in the unfamiliar motel room, my phone, my real phone, buzzed with a text from Richard. We need to discuss the house. Legal says we should accelerate the sale given current circumstances. Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m. at Laird's? My pulse quickened. Richard never initiated contact about divorce matters. That's what our lawyers were for. And he'd never suggested meeting in person since moving out. This was either an attempt to establish an alibi for something or a trap. Either way, I couldn't ignore it without raising suspicion. I typed back a non-committal response. Have a meeting with my advisor at 11. Could do 9:30 instead. Richard's reply came seconds later. 9:30 works. See you then. I set the phone aside, mind racing. Richard wanted to meet exactly when Veronica had revealed he would be in court for pretrial motions. Why lie about his availability unless he was testing me? Did he suspect I'd been in contact? With Veronica, the planned apartment search would have to wait. Instead, I needed to prepare for whatever game Richard was playing at Laird's Coffee tomorrow morning. I had less than 12 hours to decipher his strategy and formulate my countermove. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams filled with evidence bags and lockboxes, Richard's meticulous handwriting chronicling my downfall. In one particularly vivid nightmare, I stood before Judge Sullivan in a courtroom where every face, jury, bailiff, spectators, was Richard's, watching with the same cold smile as the verdict was read, guilty. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the motel's aggressive air conditioning. As I showered and dressed in the clothes I'd purchased at the big box store, I mentally rehearsed different scenarios for the upcoming meeting with Richard. Would be charming, I knew. Reasonable. The perfect performance of a man simply trying to disentangle shared assets in a civilized manner. But beneath that performance would be calculation. Every question, every gesture, carefully designed to elicit information or establish some element of his frame. My best defense was to mirror that performance, to appear cooperative while revealing nothing, to watch and listen more than I spoke, and to remember at all times that I was sitting across from not just my ex-husband, but a skilled prosecutor who had spent decades manipulating the truth to serve his purposes. By the time I left the motel, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of promise, I had my strategy. Richard believed he was the only one playing chess in our relationship. Today he would discover his opponent had been studying the board all along. Laird's coffee shop buzzed with morning commuters when I arrived at 9:25. I selected a table in the corner, positioning myself with my back to the wall, facing the entrance. The digital recorder in my pocket was already running. Richard entered at precisely 9:30, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference. Armani suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, salt and pepper hair artfully styled, the very picture of professional success. Several patrons nodded in recognition as he passed. The local DA was something of a minor celebrity. His smile, when he spotted me, was warm, practiced. The same smile he'd used in countless jury selections and press conferences. It never reached his eyes. "Emily," he said, taking the seat across from me. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You wanted to discuss the house?" "Always straight to business," Richard chuckled, raising his hand to signal a barista. "Still taking your coffee black?" I nodded, watching as he ordered for both of us without checking if I wanted something different. A small but telling habit from our marriage, the assumption that nothing about me would change, even as he had transformed entirely. "I spoke with my lawyers yesterday," Richard began once our coffees arrived. "Given the unfortunate situation, with the police investigation, they think accelerating the sale of the house makes sense. Clean break, fresh start for both of us." "Interesting timing," I commented, measuring each word. "Considering you're the one who insisted on keeping the house in both our names until the divorce was finalized." His expression remained pleasant, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes, annoyance at being challenged. "Circumstances change, Emily. I'm sure you of all people can appreciate that." "What circumstances specifically?" Richard took a deliberate sip of his coffee. "The optics aren't great, are they? Evidence from my cases found in our shared home. Even with our separation, it raises questions about security, about chain of custody." "Questions that could impact the Donovan trial?" I asked innocently. His hand paused imperceptibly before setting down his cup. "The Donovan case is one of many I'm prosecuting. But yes, defense attorneys love to seize on these kinds of irregularities. Selling the house shows we're addressing the security concern." I noticed he didn't question how I knew the Donovan case might be affected. A small but telling omission. Richard was fishing, trying to determine what I knew without revealing his interest. "What does Detective Harrison think about your suggestion to sell?" I asked. "Harrison?" Richard's brow furrowed in apparent confusion. "Why would the detective have an opinion on our real estate decisions?" "Because our house is technically a crime scene, Richard. Evidence was found there. Evidence someone planted to frame me." I held his gaze steadily. "Unless you don't believe I'm being framed?" Richard leaned back, his expression shifting to one of concern. "Emily, I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. Being caught up in something like this." He reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I kept my fingers wrapped firmly around my coffee cup. He withdrew smoothly. "I've told Harrison. I don't believe you'd do anything to compromise my cases. Your academic work is too important to you." The precision of his statement struck me, not claiming he believed in my innocence, but stating what he'd told Harrison. Classic prosecutor language, creating the impression of support while leaving room for plausible deniability. "That's considerate of you," I said carefully, "given our current relationship. Whatever's happening between us personally, I know. You're not a criminal." His smile turned rueful. "Headstrong, certainly. Frustratingly precise about everything from grocery lists to vacation itineraries, but not someone who would steal evidence." I forced a small laugh at his calculated attempt at nostalgic intimacy. "How are the pretrial motions coming? For Donovan?" Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprised that I knew his schedule. "Postponed, actually. Judge Sullivan had a family emergency." A lie, delivered flawlessly. According to Veronica, Sullivan and Richard had planned today's pretrial session weeks ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "These delays must be stressful with such a high-profile case." "Part of the job?" Richard shrugged. "But let's get back to the house. My real estate agent thinks we could list by next week if we move quickly. I'd be willing to handle the staging and showings entirely." Of course he would. The last thing Richard wanted was me spending more time in the house, potentially finding more evidence of his nocturnal activities. "I'll need to discuss it with my lawyer," I hedged. "The timing is complicated with my dissertation defense coming up." "Ah, yes, your dissertation." Richard's smile turned indulgent. "How is that going? Still analyzing the psychology of evidence tampering?" The question wasn't innocent. It was calculated to establish my academic interest in exactly the crime I was being framed for. I wondered if this entire conversation was being recorded on Richard's end, another piece of his manufactured narrative. "Actually, I've shifted focus slightly," I replied. "I'm more interested in the psychology of long-term deception, how people maintain false personas in their professional lives while engaging in contradictory behaviors privately." Richard's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. For a split second, something cold and calculating replaced the warm facade. Then it was gone, buried beneath a chuckle. "Sounds fascinating. Though I'd think studying district attorneys would be a rather dull data set. We're a pretty straightforward group. Believe in the law, hate seeing criminals walk free. You'd be surprised what people hide behind respectable careers," I said lightly. "Often the most convincing liars are those who've built their reputation on exposing the lies of others." The verbal chess match continued for another 15 minutes. Richard probing for information about what I knew, what I suspected. Me deflecting while dropping hints that I wasn't as ignorant as he believed. By the time we finished our coffees, a thin sheen of sweat had formed on Richard's forehead despite the coffee shop's aggressive air conditioning. "Well, I should get going," he said finally, checking his watch. "Court waits for no man, emergency postponements notwithstanding." Another lie. If court was indeed postponed, he wouldn't need to rush off. "Of course." I gathered my bag. "I'll let you know about the house after I've spoken with my lawyer." Richard stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through me. For 15 years, I'd watched him make that exact movement before leaving for work, before entering courtrooms, before addressing press conferences. The muscle memory of our shared life felt suddenly, overwhelmingly present. "Emily," he said, voice softening. "Despite everything, I do want what's best for you. I hope you know that." I met his gaze directly. "I believe you think you do, Richard. That's what makes this all so complicated." Confusion flickered across his features. Genuine this time, I thought. He hadn't expected philosophical ambiguity from his basic ex-wife. We parted outside the coffee shop, Richard heading toward the courthouse despite his claimed postponement. Me walking toward the university campus as if heading to my invented advisor meeting. Once Richard's town car turned the corner, I doubled back, hailing a taxi to take me to Richard's apartment building. The timing was perfect. If Richard had lied about court being postponed, he'd be occupied for at least 2 hours. If he'd told the truth, he'd likely headed to his office, which would keep him downtown, but not necessarily in his apartment. Either way, it created the window I needed. The luxury high-rise gleamed in the morning sun, all glass and sleek angles. I approached not through the grand lobby with its uniformed doormen, but via the service entrance in the attached parking structure. The key I'd kept from the charity event slid perfectly into the lock, granting me access to a utilitarian hallway leading to the freight elevator. I pulled a baseball cap low over my face, mindful of the security cameras. If questioned later, I wanted to be just another unidentifiable figure in maintenance access areas. The freight elevator required a key card for upper floors, but a quick study of the panel revealed a workaround: the fire override switch, designed to make all floors accessible during emergencies, could be activated with a simple tool I'd brought specifically for this purpose. Richard's apartment was on the 22nd floor, high enough to boast impressive views, but not the ultra-premium penthouse level his ego might have preferred. I exited the freight elevator cautiously, checking the empty hallway before making my way to Unit 2203. The door lock presented a greater challenge. Unlike the service entrance with its simple mechanical key, Richard's apartment featured an electronic keypad. I had anticipated this, bringing a device purchased from a former student now working in cybersecurity, ostensibly for a demonstration, in my forensic technology seminar. The device took nearly 3 minutes to cycle through potential codes, each second stretching painfully as I stood exposed in the hallway. Finally, a soft click indicated success, and I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. Richard's apartment was immaculate, minimalist in a way our home together had never been. Sleek leather furniture, abstract art in muted tones, a kitchen that looked barely used. No personal photographs, no mementos, a space designed for appearances rather than living. I moved methodically through the rooms, mindful of disturbing nothing. Richard would notice even the slightest change in his carefully arranged environment. The living room and kitchen yielded nothing of interest. The bathroom medicine cabinet contained standard toiletries plus prescription sleep aids, new since our marriage, suggesting Richard wasn't resting as peacefully as his confident exterior suggested. In the bedroom, I checked beneath the mattress, inside hollowed-out books, behind the headboard, all places Richard had hidden items in our home together. Nothing. The closet, filled with identical suits and precisely arranged shoes, seemed equally unpromising until I noticed a small safe tucked behind hanging garment. Bags. Unlike the attic lockbox, this safe had a digital combination. I considered possible codes. Richard had always used significant dates for passwords. Our anniversary was unlikely given the divorce. His birthday felt too obvious for something this important. I tried his law school graduation date, 05/15/98. The safe remained locked. His mother's birthday, 11/22/44. Nothing. Then I remembered a detail from our early dating days. Richard's first major case win, the date he claimed changed his career. 07/09/03. The safe beeped softly, the door swinging open to reveal several stacked folders and a thick envelope. Heart racing, I photographed everything in precise order before examining the contents. The first folder contained offshore account information, Cayman Islands, Singapore, Switzerland, showing balances totaling over $12 million. The second held property deeds for locations Richard had never mentioned: a villa in Costa Rica, an apartment in Paris, a cabin in Wyoming, all purchased through shell companies, all within days or weeks of major case resolutions. The thick envelope held photographs: Richard with various individuals at restaurants, hotels, secluded locations. I recognized several wealthy defendants from his past cases. Each photo was labeled with dates and amounts, payment records disguised as innocent meetings. And there, in the most recent section, multiple photos of Richard with Robert Donovan at the lake cabin, including one showing them examining what appeared to be the very evidence bag later found in my house. I photographed everything methodically, careful to replace each document exactly as I found it. The evidence was damning, not just regarding the Donovan case, but establishing a pattern of corruption spanning Richard's entire career. As I closed the safe, making sure it reset properly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the apartment. Froze, blood turning to ice in my veins. Had Richard returned early? Was it building maintenance? A neighbor? Silently, I slipped into the walk-in closet, pulling the door nearly closed, leaving just enough space to monitor the apartment entrance. The seconds stretched into minutes with no further sounds. Had I imagined it? I was preparing to emerge when I heard the distinctive electronic beep of the door lock disengaging. The apartment door swung open, revealing not Richard, but a uniformed police officer, Detective Ward, one of Harrison's colleagues and a regular at Richard's poker nights. During our marriage, my pulse thundered in my ears as I watched him enter, closing the door behind him. Ward moved purposefully through the apartment, heading directly to Richard's office, a room I hadn't yet explored. He seemed familiar with the layout, suggesting this wasn't his first visit to Richard's new home. From my hidden position, I could just see through the office doorway as Ward accessed Richard's computer, inserting a flash drive and downloading files. After several minutes, he removed the drive, returned the computer to exactly the state he'd found it, and made a brief phone call. "It's done," he said quietly. "Everything from the last week. Yeah, I'm heading out now." No, nobody saw me come. Ward left as quietly as he'd arrived, the apartment falling silent once more. I remained motionless in the closet for a full 5 minutes, ensuring he was truly gone before emerging. The encounter raised disturbing questions. Why was a police detective accessing Richard's personal computer? What files was he copying? The most likely explanation aligned with Veronica's warning. Richard had officers in his pocket, helping him build the case against me. I had to see what was on Richard's computer. Moving to the office, I found the machine still powered on, its screen displaying a simple password prompt. Unlike the safe, Richard's computer would almost certainly lock me out after failed attempts. I needed a different approach. On a hunch, I checked beneath the keyboard, finding a small notepad with several passwords written in Richard's precise handwriting, not for his main computer, but for various accounts and files. A careless security lapse for someone otherwise so meticulous, but one that aligned with Richard's supreme confidence that no one would ever access his private space without permission. I photographed the notepad before replacing it exactly as I'd found it. Then, using the gloves I'd brought to avoid leaving fingerprints, I carefully explored the office, discovering a hidden panel behind a law degree hanging on the wall. Inside, another USB drive. With time running short, I had to make a decision: take the drive and risk Richard noticing its absence, or leave it and potentially miss crucial evidence. I opted for a middle path, using my phone to photograph the drive's label and serial number. With this information, Tom Jang might be able to determine its contents through technical means I didn't possess. As I finished documenting my findings, replacing everything exactly as I'd found it, My burner phone vibrated with a text from Veronica. Urgent. R meeting with M this afternoon. Plans changing. Call me now. R was obviously Richard, but who was M? And what plans were changing? I needed to get out of the apartment immediately to find out. I exited as I'd entered, through the service areas, keeping my head down for cameras. Only when I was several blocks away, lost in the anonymity of downtown pedestrians, did I call. Veronica from the burner phone. Thank God, she answered immediately. Where have you been? Gathering evidence, I said vaguely. Who is M? Mitchell. Paul Mitchell from the State Attorney General's office. He's accelerating the timeline. Richards. Federal appointment is being fast-tracked. The background check begins tomorrow. My blood ran cold. How does that affect the Donovan case? Richards pushing to begin jury selection tomorrow instead of Monday. He's rushing everything to get the verdict before the background check can. Dig too deep? Can he do that? With Sullivan as the judge? Absolutely. Veronica sounded breathless, anxious. Emily, this changes our entire timeline. Jang wants to meet tonight instead of at 3 a.m. He says we need to move before the jury is seated. I processed this, mind racing. Where and when? His office, 8 p.m. I'm texting you the address now. After ending the call, I checked the time, barely noon. I had 8 hours before meeting Jang, and a critical decision to make. Do I return home, knowing it might be under surveillance but needing to retrieve the evidence I'd hidden there? Or do I abandon that evidence and rely solely on what I'd gathered from Richard's apartment? The answer came as I passed a bank, its ATM vestibule offering momentary privacy. I withdrew the maximum daily amount from my personal account. If I was about to go to war with the district attorney, I needed operating capital that couldn't be easily frozen when Richard realized I was fighting back. Next, I stopped at an electronics store, purchasing a high-capacity external hard drive and a prepaid mobile hotspot, tools for the digital battleground ahead. At a department store across the street, I bought a change of clothes and basic toiletries. If I couldn't safely return home, I needed to be prepared. The final stop was a storage facility on the outskirts of town, where I rented a small unit under my maiden name, paying 3 months in advance with cash. There, I transferred the photographs from my phone to the new hard drive, making multiple backups of everything I'd discovered. By mid-afternoon, I was as prepared as I could be for whatever came next. With hours still to kill before meeting Jang, I decided to risk a carefully controlled return home. Not to stay, but to retrieve the original journal pages I'd photographed and anything else that might strengthen our case against Richard. I approached my neighborhood cautiously, parking several blocks away and walking through a neighbor's yard to access the back of my property. Through the kitchen window, I could see the house was empty, though signs of the police search remained. Cabinet, doors not quite closed, papers on the counter not as I'd left them. Using my key, I entered silently through the back door, moving directly to the attic access panel. The lockbox remained undisturbed, Richard's journal exactly where I'd found it. I photographed several additional pages I'd missed during my first examination, then carefully replaced everything. Next, I retrieved the external hard drive I'd hidden. Inside the hollowed-out psychology textbook in my office, a hiding place inspired by Richard's own method with his law books. On it were years of financial records I'd meticulously kept during our marriage, including deposits and withdrawals that had never made sense given Richard's official salary. As I was about to leave, a final thought struck me. The security system, if Richard had viewed the footage, he would know I'd discovered his nighttime visits. I needed to check if he'd accessed the system. The security portal showed login activity from an unknown IP address 3 days earlier, the day before the police search. Richard had reviewed the footage, which meant he knew I might have seen him planting evidence. I was no longer dealing with a hypothetical frame-up based on circumstantial evidence. I was dealing with a cornered predator who knew I had leverage against him. As this realization settled over me, Headlights swept across the front of the house, a car pulling into the driveway. Through the living room window, I recognized Detective Harrison's unmarked police cruiser. There was no time to exit the way I'd come in. Instead, I slipped into the small half-bathroom off the kitchen, leaving the door cracked just enough to monitor the situation. The front door opened without a knock, Harrison using the key Richard would have provided. "Clear," Harrison called out, and two more figures entered behind him, Officer Ward and Richard himself. "You're sure the security system didn't show her returning?" Richard asked, voice tight with controlled anger. "Nothing since she left for coffee with you this morning," Ward confirmed. "Either she's staying somewhere else, or she's being very careful about how she comes and goes." "She's up to something," Richard muttered, pacing the entryway. "That meeting this morning, she knew things she shouldn't have known. About Donovan, about Sullivan. Could be she's just following your cases in the news," Harrison suggested. "You're a public figure, Richard." Richard dismissed this with a sharp gesture. "No. She specifically mentioned today's pretrial motions, information that wasn't public, that was changed just yesterday." "You think someone's feeding her information?" Ward asked. "I think we need to accelerate everything." Richard moved into the living room, the other men following. From my hiding place, I could see only portions of them through the cracked door. "I want her brought in for questioning tomorrow morning, immediately after jury selection begins. Make it official, visible, reporters present if possible." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "On what grounds? We've already questioned her about the evidence found here." "On grounds of new evidence," Richard snapped. "The flash drive Ward planted in her university office this morning, the one containing communications with Donovan's defense team." My blood ran cold. They had planted additional evidence while I'd been meeting with Richard at the coffee shop. "And if she has an alibi for when those communications supposedly happened?" Harrison pressed, sounding increasingly uneasy. "She won't," Richard said, confidently. "The timestamps will match periods when she was alone, working from home. No witnesses, no electronic footprint to contradict the narrative." Ward nodded along, but Harrison's posture suggested growing reservation. "Richard, this is moving beyond irregular into what, Detective?" Richard's voice dropped dangerously low. "Into ensuring a murderer's conviction isn't overturned. On a technicality? Into protecting the integrity of the district attorney's office? Or perhaps you're concerned about those sealed juvenile records of your sons that could accidentally become unsealed if this case falls apart." Harrison's face hardened, but he said nothing, the threat having found its mark. "This ends tomorrow," Richard continued, his tone softening to something almost conciliatory. "Emily is picked up, evidence is secured, jury is selected. By the time the weekend arrives, this entire situation is contained. You both get your bonuses, I get my appointment, and life moves on." They conducted a cursory search of the main floor, thankfully not approaching the bathroom where I hid, barely breathing, before heading upstairs. I heard their footsteps overhead, drawers opening and closing. "Her laptop's gone," Ward called down. "Clothes missing, too." "She's running," Richard said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Perfect. Adds to the narrative." The three men departed about 20 minutes later, leaving me trembling in my hiding place. I waited a full 10 minutes after hearing their cars pull away before emerging, clutching the hard drive and journal photographs to my chest. The situation had deteriorated beyond my worst fears. Not only was Richard framing me, but he had police actively participating in the frame-up, planting false evidence and preparing to arrest me the next day. I had less than 18 hours before they moved against me. As darkness fell, I slipped out the back door for the last time, knowing I might never return to the home I'd shared with Richard. Whatever happened next would determine not just the outcome of the Donovan case, but whether I would spend years in prison for crimes I didn't commit. The meeting with Tom Jang had just become my only hope. Tom Jang's office occupied the top, Floor of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, an area that emptied after business hours, providing the privacy our meeting required. The building's security consisted of a simple keypad at the entrance, the code for which Veronica had provided. I arrived 20 minutes early, circling the block twice to ensure I hadn't been followed. The streets were deserted save for a homeless man pushing a shopping cart and a couple walking their dog. Neither paid me any attention as I entered the code and slipped inside. The elevator rumbled to the 5th floor, opening directly into a large, open-concept space. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, offering views of the distant downtown skyline where Richard's luxury apartment gleamed among other towers. Industrial pipes and ductwork remained exposed on the ceiling, while the concrete floors had been polished to a soft sheen. The space felt deliberately understated, functional rather than impressive. A man stood silhouetted against the windows, turning as the elevator doors closed behind me. Jang was younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His posture suggested military training, while his watchful eyes assessed me with professional detachment. "Dr. Chen," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident. "Thank you for coming, especially given the accelerated circumstances." "Where's Veronica?" I asked, not moving further into the room. "On her way. She's bringing copies of documents we can't access electronically." Jang gestured toward a large conference table. "Please, have a seat." "I understand you've had a very eventful day." I remained standing. "How do I know I can trust you?" A small smile touched Jang's lips. "You don't. Just as I have no way of knowing if I can trust you." He moved to a credenza and poured 2 glasses of water. "But we have aligned interests, which is often more reliable than trust." "Your wife's case?" I said. "Sandra Jang. Richard threw it in exchange for money." Jang's expression hardened momentarily. "Yes, though technically she's my ex-wife now." He set one water glass at the edge of the table closest to me. "What Richard did destroyed more than her legal case. It destroyed our marriage, our family business, our reputation in the community." "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely meaning it. I knew firsthand how Richard's actions rippled outward, damaging lives beyond his immediate targets. "I've spent 5 years building a case against him," Jang continued, "gathering evidence, tracking financial transactions, interviewing witnesses from other cases where evidence mysteriously disappeared or testimony suddenly changed. Richard Moore has corrupted the justice system for nearly 2 decades, Dr. Chen. Your situation is merely the latest example of his methods." The elevator hummed to life behind me. We both tensed, watching the floor indicator as it rose from the lobby. When the doors opened, Veronica stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio and looking considerably more disheveled than when I'd last seen her. "Traffic was a nightmare," she explained, placing the portfolio on the table, "and I had to take a circuitous route to make sure I wasn't followed." She glanced between us. "Have you shown her?" Jang shook his head. "We were just getting acquainted." He turned to me. "Dr. Chen, please sit. What I'm about to show you will take some time to process." Cautiously, I took a seat at the conference table, positioning myself so I could see both Jang and the elevator. Veronica sat across from me while Jang retrieved a laptop from his desk. "For the past 5 years," he began, setting up the computer, "I've been tracking Richard's activities through a network of sources: court clerks, paralegals, defendants who were approached for bribes but refused, family members of those wrongfully convicted when Richard manipulated evidence to secure convictions despite innocence." "He's done that too?" I asked, horrified. "Convicted innocent people?" Jang nodded grimly. "When it served his purpose or advanced his career. Richard Moore is not merely corrupt, Dr. Chen. He's a sociopath who views the justice system as his personal chessboard, and everyone in it, suspects, victims, witnesses, colleagues, as pieces to be moved or sacrificed according to his needs." "Doi," Assessment hit uncomfortably close to my own recent realizations about my ex-husband. "Call me Emily," I said quietly. Jang connected his laptop to a large monitor on the wall. "Emily, what I'm about to show you is the result of 5 years of investigation. Some of it will be difficult to watch." The screen filled with a document labeled Operation Clean Courts, subject Richard Moore. It contained hundreds of entries in a detailed timeline stretching back 15 years, cases, dates, financial transactions, witness names. "This is our working file," Jang explained. "Every instance where we found evidence of Richard taking bribes, tampering with evidence, threatening witnesses, or otherwise perverting justice for personal gain." He scrolled through the document, stopping at random entries to highlight particularly egregious examples. A domestic violence case where Richard had allowed the wealthy, politically connected abuser to plead to simple assault despite overwhelming evidence of brutal attacks. A drunk driving case involving a judge's son that had been quietly dismissed due to insufficient evidence, despite blood alcohol readings twice the legal limit. A sexual assault case where the victim had suddenly recanted after receiving anonymous threats. Threats Jang had traced back to an associate of Richard's. "How has no one noticed this pattern?" I asked, sickened by the scope of corruption. "People see what they expect to see," Veronica answered. "Richard maintains a public image of the crusading prosecutor. He's careful to win the right cases, high profile, crimes with sympathetic victims and overwhelming evidence. Those victories shield his selective justice in cases where he stands to benefit from manipulation." Jang clicked to a new section of the document, titled Financial Analysis. Bar graphs and flowcharts detailed Richard's official income versus his actual lifestyle and hidden assets. "He's accumulated at least $18 million beyond what his salary could support," Jang explained, "funneled through offshore accounts, shell companies, and strategic investments." The figure staggered me. During our marriage, I'd known we lived well, better than a public servant's salary should allow, but I'd attributed it to Richard's family money and his self-proclaimed investment skills. 18 million suggested a level of corruption far beyond what I'd imagined. "And the Donovan case?" I asked. "How does it fit into this pattern?" Jang exchanged a glance with Veronica before clicking to a new file. "The Donovan case represents Richard's largest payoff to date. $5 million for an acquittal, with significant political benefits as well. Robert Donovan isn't just wealthy, he's influential, with connections reaching to the governor's office and beyond." The screen displayed photographs of Robert Donovan, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the confident posture of generational wealth, meeting with various political figures, including the governor and a U.S. senator I recognized from news coverage. "Donovan has been quietly funding a super PAC supporting candidates aligned with his development interests," Jang continued, "including the current administration, which is fast-tracking Richard's federal appointment. So Richard secures Jerome Donovan's acquittal," I reasoned, "gets $5 million plus a federal appointment that places him beyond local jurisdiction and accountability." "Exactly," Veronica confirmed. "It's the perfect exit strategy. Once he's in the federal system, he becomes virtually untouchable. Different oversight, different investigative procedures, powerful new allies." Jang clicked to another screen, this one showing case details for State vs. Donovan. "The evidence against Jerome Donovan is overwhelming. DNA under the victim's fingernails, security footage placing him at the scene, threatening text messages, the murder weapon with his fingerprints. In any normal circumstance, this would be an easy conviction. Which is why Richard needed to create abnormal circumstances," I concluded. "By planting evidence in my house, he breaks the chain of custody, renders key evidence inadmissible, and creates a scapegoat," Veronica added. "You become the story, not the mounting pattern of irregularities in his prosecution history." I opened my bag, retrieving the external hard drive containing the evidence I'd gathered. "I have something. To add to your investigation, Material that directly connects Richard to the Donovan family and documents his planting of evidence. Jang's expression sharpened with interest as I explained what I'd found. The journal in the attic, the security footage of Richard's nighttime visits, the hidden safe in his apartment with offshore account information, and photographic evidence of meetings with defendants, including Robert Donovan. "You've been busy," he said with newfound respect, connecting my hard drive to his system. "This is exactly the kind of direct evidence we've been seeking." As Jang reviewed my findings, copying files to his secure server, Veronica leaned forward. "Emily, there's something else you should know." Her voice had dropped to near a whisper. "We believe Richard has done this before, framed someone close to him when they became a liability." A chill ran through me. "Who?" "His former investigator." "David Cruz," Jang answered without looking up from his computer. Cruz worked closely with Richard for 7 years. By all accounts, they were friends as well as colleagues. 3 years ago, Cruz was convicted of tampering with evidence in a high-profile murder case, evidence that would have exonerated the Y defendant, who happened to be the son of a prominent real estate developer. "Another Donovan situation," I murmured. "Similar pattern, yes," Jang confirmed. "The developer paid Richard to ensure a conviction. Cruz discovered the scheme and confronted Richard privately. 2 weeks later, Cruz was arrested after additional evidence was found in his garage, evidence that implicated him in an evidence-switching scheme." "And let me guess," I said, the pattern now painfully familiar. "The evidence was found based on an anonymous tip, and Richard expressed shock and betrayal at his trusted colleague's actions. He even testified against Cruz at trial," Veronica added. "Called it the most painful professional experience of his career." The parallels to my situation were unmistakable. "Where is Cruz now?" "Serving 8 years at Parkman Correctional," Jang replied. "We've tried to contact him, but he refuses all visitors except family. His wife divorced him shortly after his conviction, and his reputation was destroyed." The potential future Richard had planned for me materialized in stark detail. Not just framed, but convicted, imprisoned, isolated, ruined. The calculated cruelty of it tightened my chest. "We need to move quickly," I said, refocusing on the immediate threat. "Richard plans to have me arrested tomorrow morning, immediately after jury selection begins. They've planted additional evidence. In my university office, a flash drive supposedly containing communications with Donovan's defense team." Jang's typing paused. "How do you know this?" I explained, overhearing Richard's conversation with Detectives Harrison and Ward, including the explicit mentions of payments and blackmail. "This matches what our sources have reported," Jang confirmed. "Richard has been unusually generous with certain officers lately, particularly those involved in evidence handling." "What options do we have?" I asked. "Less than 12 hours before they move against me." Jang leaned back, considering. "We have several potential strategies, but all involve risk. The safest for you personally would be to leave town immediately. Disappear until we can secure enough cooperation from federal authorities to move against Richard directly." "Running makes me look guilty," I objected. "It reinforces his narrative." "Yes, but it keeps you out of jail while we work to dismantle that narrative." Zhang's expression was sympathetic but pragmatic. "Once you're in the system, Richard's influence makes everything more difficult." "What are the alternatives?" "We go offensive," Veronica suggested. "Take what we have directly to the state attorney general, bypass local authorities entirely." "With what we have now, that's risky," Jang cautioned. "The AG would be obligated to investigate, but investigations take time. Richard has friends in that office too, including Mitchell. We'd need something undeniable, something that would force immediate action." I thought of the USB drive I'd seen in Richard's hidden wall compartment. "What about the drive in Richard's office? The one behind his law degree? If we could access that?" "Too dangerous," Jang said immediately. "Breaking into the DA's apartment once was risky enough. A second attempt when he's already suspicious? The risk outweighs the potential reward. A new thought struck me. What about his backup records? Richard was always paranoid about losing work. During our marriage, he maintained duplicate copies of important files at our lake house. Jang and Veronica exchanged glances. Lake house? Jang asked. This isn't in our records. It's not technically ours, I explained. It belongs to Richard's aunt, who lives in Arizona. She let us use it whenever we wanted. Richard set up a small office there for weekend work. It's where he kept redundant copies of his most sensitive files. Would he still be using it after the separation? Veronica asked. Almost certainly. His aunt adores him, and the location is completely private. 20 acres, no close neighbors, limited cell service. It's perfect for sensitive work or meetings. He doesn't want observed. Jang was already typing, searching property records. Address? 87. Lakeview Road, Hampton Falls. Registered to Margaret Moore. Found it, Jang confirmed. No obvious security system registered with local providers. When was the last time you were there? About 8 months ago, just before our separation. Richard claimed he needed to work uninterrupted on the Jang case. I nodded toward Veronica. Now I understand why he was so insistent on going alone. Do you still have access? Jang asked. I have keys to the main house and the boathouse. The alarm code was my birthday, though he may have changed it. This could be exactly what we need, Jang said, excitement building in his voice. If Richard keeps backup records there, including documentation of the Donovan arrangement. It's a 3-hour drive, Veronica pointed out. We'd need to leave immediately to have time to search the property and return before morning. I'll go, I decided. I know the layout, where Richard would likely hide sensitive materials, and I can bypass the alarm if he's changed the code. Not alone, Jang countered. Too risky. I'll go with you. Veronica can continue compiling our evidence here and prepare contingency plans in case Richard moves earlier than expected. Veronica nodded agreement. I'll also reach out to my contact at the FBI. They won't move without solid evidence, but we can put them on alert that something significant may be coming. The plan quickly took shape. Jang and I would drive separately to Hampton Falls. My car was potentially being tracked, and 2 vehicles provided backup in case of emergency. Veronica would remain at the office, coordinating our digital evidence and maintaining communication through encrypted channels. If we found incriminating material at the lake house, we would immediately transmit copies to Veronica, who would begin preparation for an emergency meeting with trusted contacts at the state attorney general's office. What about the evidence? In my university office? I asked. The planted flash drive? Leave it, Jang advised. Removing it would alert Richard that his plan has been discovered. Better to neutralize him before the frame can be completed. As Jang gathered equipment for our lake house expedition, cameras, portable scanners, lock-picking tools, I pulled Veronica aside. There's something I need to ask, I said quietly. About your relationship with Richard. She tensed visibly. What about it? Was any of it real, or was it always just part of your assignment? Veronica's gaze dropped to her hands. It wasn't supposed to be real. I was hired to get close, to find evidence. The relationship was a tactical decision. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But yes, there were moments when it became something else. Richard can be incredibly charming, attentive, making you feel like the center of his universe. I knew that feeling all too well. It was what had drawn me to Richard 15 years earlier. His intense focus had made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. When did you realize who he truly was? I asked. When I found documentation of the cruise frame-up, she answered without hesitation. A recording Richard had kept. I don't know why, maybe as insurance, of him discussing with Detective Ward how they would plant evidence in Cruz's garage. The casual way they planned to destroy an innocent man's life. She shuddered. I saw everything differently after that. Every smile, every touch became contaminated. Her description resonated painfully. Since discovering Richard's journal, I'd been re-examining our entire marriage through a new lens, wondering how much had been genuine and how much calculated performance. "I'm sorry," Veronica added softly, "for my part in all of this, for the pain it caused you." "You were doing your job," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "And in the end, you chose truth over comfort. That counts for something." Jang approached, with 2 small backpacks. "We should move. I've loaded basic surveillance equipment, tools for accessing locked spaces, and secure communication devices." He handed me one of the packs. "Once we're on site, we'll maintain radio silence except for emergencies or to transmit discovered evidence." As we prepared to leave, Veronica handed me a small object that looked like a thumb drive. "If you find anything on paper rather than digital, use this. It's a portable scanner that transmits directly to our secure server. 3 seconds per page." I pocketed the device, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what we were about to do. Less than 48 hours ago, I had been a soon-to-be divorced academic, focused on completing my dissertation and rebuilding my life after Richard's betrayal. Now I was preparing to break into a private property to gather evidence against the district attorney, working with a private investigator and Richard's former mistress, racing against a frame-up scheduled to spring shut in less than 12 hours. "Are you sure about this?" Jang asked, reading my expression. "There's still time to take the safer route, disappear for a few weeks while we build the case more slowly." I thought of David Cruz, serving 8 years in prison for crossing Richard, of the defendants who had been wrongfully convicted because Richard prioritized his career advancement over justice, of the 15 years I'd spent married to a man who had been living a double life the entire time. "I'm sure," I said, my resolve hardening. "Richard has spent his career manipulating the system while presenting himself as its champion. It's time someone held him accountable." We left the office separately, Jang taking the elevator while I descended 5 flights of stairs as a precaution against surveillance. The night air was cool against my face as I walked to my car, parked 3 blocks away in a public garage. As I drove toward the interstate that would take us north to Hampton Falls, I caught sight of the downtown skyline. In my rearview mirror, somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Richard was likely preparing for tomorrow's triumph. Jury selection, followed by my very public arrest, the perfect distraction from the irregularities in his case against Jerome Donovan. He didn't know that his ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed as merely convenient, useful furniture in his life, was now his most dangerous adversary. 15 years of being underestimated had taught me patience, observation, and the ability to move unnoticed. Skills Richard had never bothered to recognize were now the very ones that might bring him down. The lake house waited 90 miles ahead, possibly containing the evidence that would dismantle everything Richard had built. I pressed the accelerator, city lights fading behind me as darkness enveloped the highway. Time to discover what secrets Richard had hidden in his private sanctuary. The drive to Hampton Falls took nearly 3 hours, following winding country, roads that became increasingly remote. Jang maintained a discreet distance behind me, headlights visible in my mirror like distant stars. We'd agreed to communicate solely through text unless absolutely necessary, using the encrypted messaging app he'd installed on my burner phone. Margaret Moore's lake house appeared exactly as I remembered it. A sprawling, cedar-sided retreat. Nestled among pine trees, its wide windows reflecting moonlight off the lake beyond. No lights shone from within, no vehicles in the exposed portion of the circular driveway. If Richard had visited recently, he'd left no obvious signs. I parked on a maintenance access road a quarter mile from the property, Jang pulling alongside. A moment later, we'd used the dense woods surrounding the house for cover, approaching on foot to minimize the chance of detection. "Any security we should be aware of?" Jang asked as we retrieved our backpacks. "Motion sensors at the main entry. Points, but they're tied to the alarm system. If we can bypass that, the sensors aren't an issue. No cameras last time I was here, though Richard might have added some. We moved through the trees in silence, Jang following my lead as I navigated familiar terrain. The lake air smelled of pine and water, stirring memories of weekends spent here during happier times, or what I had believed were happier times. Had Richard been conducting corrupt business even then, using our romantic getaways as cover for meetings with defendants and fixers? At the property's edge, we paused to survey the scene. The house remained dark and still. A soft breeze rippled. Across the lake, gentle waves lapping against the private dock, where a small covered boat slip-housed Margaret's pontoon boat. "We'll try the boathouse first," I whispered. "It connects to the main house through a covered walkway. If Richards, change the alarm code. We have better chances of accessing it undetected." Jang nodded, following as I led the way along the water's edge to the wooden structure extending over the lake. The boathouse door yielded to my key, swinging open silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the smell of varnish and cedar enveloped us as I swept my flashlight over the familiar space. Margaret's pontoon boat bobbing gently in its slip, fishing gear and water toys arranged neatly on built-in shelves. "This way," I indicated the interior door leading to the covered walkway. "Once inside, we'll know if the alarm's been reset." The walkway connected to the main house through a mudroom that doubled as Margaret's gardening space. If the alarm was active, entering would trigger a 30-second countdown before the system alerted the security company. Plenty of time to enter the code if Richard hadn't changed it, or to retreat if he had. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to the mudroom. No alarm sounded. Either the system wasn't armed, or Richard had left my birthday as the code, believing I'd never return to this place without him. We moved carefully through the dark house, our flashlights revealing rooms frozen in time since my last visit. Margaret's eclectic furniture, family photos including several of Richard and me, the fully stocked kitchen where we'd prepared elaborate dinners during weekend stays. Where would Richard keep sensitive materials? Jang whispered as we cleared the main living areas. "His office is upstairs, end of the hall," I replied. But knowing Richard, anything truly important would be hidden. He has a profound distrust of safes, says they practically advertise where valuables are kept. False bottoms in drawers, hollow books, hidden compartments? Jang suggested, "All possibilities. Let's start with his office and work systematically." Richard's lake house office was a smaller version of his city workspace. Meticulously organized bookshelves, a large oak desk positioned to enjoy views of the lake, framed law degrees and commendations on the walls. Unlike the sterile minimalism of his apartment, this space showed traces of the Richard one had married. A fishing photo on the desk, comfortable furniture, a collection of vintage legal texts he'd genuinely treasured. "Check the books first," I suggested. Richard collects early editions of legal commentaries, perfect hiding places for flash drives or memory cards. We worked methodically, examining each volume for signs of tampering, checking behind picture frames, beneath drawer liners. 20 minutes of search yielded nothing suspicious. "Let's think like Richard," I said, stepping back to survey the room. He wouldn't keep sensitive material in obvious hiding spots, but he also wouldn't want it far from where he works. My gaze settled on the elegant floor lamp beside the desk, an antique brass piece with a green glass shade. During our marriage, Richard had developed a habit of tapping the lamp's base 3 times before beginning important work, a superstition he'd picked up from his first mentor, claiming it brought clarity to complex problems. Moving to the lamp, I examined its heavy base carefully. Nothing seemed unusual until I noticed the seam where the brass connected to the marble bottom, slightly wider on one side than the other. On a hunch, I pressed the brass swirl pattern at the widest point of the seam and twisted. The base rotated smoothly, revealing a hidden compartment containing a portable external hard drive. "Jang," I called softly. "I found something." He joined me, eyes widening at the discovery. "Clever, hiding in plain sight. I carefully removed the drive, noting it was the same brand and model as the one I'd glimpsed in Richard's apartment wall safe. Jang quickly connected it to his specialized laptop, designed for forensic examination of digital evidence. "It's encrypted," he said after a moment. "High-level security. Breaking it would take specialized equipment we don't have here." "Try Rachel 729, I suggested. Capital R, no spaces. Jang looked up, questioning. His mother's name and his badge? Number from when he briefly worked as an assistant DA in New York, I explained. He used variations of it for sensitive passwords during our marriage. Jang typed the suggestion, then shook his head. No luck. I thought for a moment, considering what password Richard might use for his most secret files. Something significant to him, but not obvious to others. Try Veritas June 2005, I said. Capital 5, no spaces. Jang entered the characters, and the screen suddenly populated with folders. We're in. How did you know? Veritas was Richard's law, school society. June 2005 was when he won his first major case, the one that put him on the map as a rising star prosecutor. He's referenced that date as the beginning of his real career ever since. Jang began copying files to his secure system, simultaneously transmitting them to Veronica via the encrypted connection. This is extraordinary, he murmured as the contents displayed on screen. Financial records, meeting notes, explicit documentation. Of bribe amounts and case outcomes, he kept records of everything. Richard always needed proof of his own cleverness, I said, recognizing the pattern from the journal I'd found. Even if no one else ever saw it, he wanted a record of how he'd manipulated the system. As Jang worked on the digital files, I continued searching the office, looking for any physical documents Richard might have stored. The oak desk yielded nothing unusual, nor did the credenza or bookshelves. My attention turned to the single-family photo on Richard's desk, a candid shot from our 5th anniversary trip to Maine. We stood on a rocky cliff overlooking the Atlantic, windswept and laughing. I remembered the day clearly, one of those rare, perfect moments when everything felt right in the world. Had Richard already been corrupt then? Had he already started using his position for personal gain? Or had there been a time when the man I married was genuinely committed to justice? I picked up the frame, studying Richard's face for clues I might have missed. As I did, something shifted inside the frame. A slight rattling sound that shouldn't have been there. Turning it over, I examined the backing more carefully, noticing one corner was slightly looser than the others. Gently prying it open, I discovered a small SD card taped inside. Jang, I called again. Another storage device. He looked up from his laptop. This could be what we need for the Donovan case specifically. The drive contains historical records, but nothing recent about Donovan. The SD card proved easier to access, containing just 2 video files and a PDF document. Jang opened the first video, and Robert Donovan's face filled the screen. Is it recording? Donovan asked someone off camera. Yes. Richard's voice, unmistakable. State your name and what this meeting is regarding, for the record. Robert Donovan. Regarding arrangements for my son Jerome's case. The video showed Donovan explaining in explicit detail the payment structure for ensuring his son's acquittal. $2 million up front, 3 upon successful completion. Richard's questions were careful, specific, establishing exactly what was being purchased. And you understand my requirements? Richard asked toward the end of the recording. The evidence issues, the potential need for a scapegoat? Whatever it takes, Donovan replied dismissively. $5 million buys a lot of flexibility, counselor. The second video showed a similar meeting with Judge Sullivan, discussing how jury instructions would be worded to virtually guarantee reasonable doubt, and how certain evidentiary rulings would favor the defense without appearing suspicious. The PDF contained a detailed timeline for the case, including the precise date when evidence would be discovered missing from the chain of custody, and a contingency plan involving my framing if needed. "This is it," Jang said, voice tight with controlled excitement. "Explicit evidence of judicial corruption, bribery, evidence tampering, conspiracy to obstruct justice. More than enough to secure immediate intervention from the state attorney, general, possibly federal authorities." He transmitted the files to Veronica while I photographed the physical SD card in situ, documenting exactly where and how it had been hidden. As we worked, a sudden sound from downstairs froze us both, the unmistakable sound of a key in the front door lock. "Someone's here," Jang whispered, quickly disconnecting his equipment. We had no time to replace the hard drive or SD card in their hiding places. Instead, Jang pocketed both as we moved swiftly to the office door, listening intently. Footsteps echoed through the house. At least 2 people, moving with the confidence of rightful occupants rather than the caution of intruders. "Should have everything we need by morning." A familiar voice drifted up the stairs. "Richard. Once Emily's in custody, the narrative will be firmly established." "The judge is on board?" A second voice, deeper, with the faint traces of a New England accent. Not one I recognized. "Sullivan's handling everything on the court side. The evidence problems will be attributed to Emily's interference. Donovan walks, everyone gets paid, and I get my federal appointment." The voices moved toward the kitchen, giving us a chance to slip from the office toward the back staircase that led to the boathouse walkway. Moving silently, we descended the narrow stairs, pausing at each creaking step. We had almost reached the bottom when the light switched on, flooding the stairwell with harsh brightness. "Well," Richard said from the foot of the stairs, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a bemused expression on his face. "This is unexpected." Behind him stood Robert Donovan himself, looking considerably less amused. "We were trapped." "Emily," Richard said, his voice deceptively calm. "And Tom Jang. What an interesting partnership." He took a sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving mine. "Breaking and entering is a serious crime, you know, especially for someone already under investigation for evidence tampering." Jang and I remained frozen on the stairs, caught between retreat and confrontation. I quickly calculated our options. The boathouse exit was blocked by Richard and Donovan, while going back upstairs would only trap us further. "How did you know we'd be here?" I asked, playing for time. Jang had transmitted the most damning evidence to Veronica, but we needed to escape alive for it to matter. Richard's smile was coldly amused. "I didn't. This was simply an unfortunate coincidence. For you." He gestured with his whiskey glass. "Mr. Donovan and I had some final details to discuss before tomorrow's proceedings. Somewhere private, away from prying eyes." "Like your arrangement to throw his son's case for $5 million? I kept my voice steady, watching Richard's expression. The smile faltered slightly. "That's quite an accusation, Emily. Especially without evidence." "We have the videos, Richard," I said. "The ones you recorded of your meetings with Donovan and Judge Sullivan. The external drive with your financial records, all transmitted to multiple secure locations before you arrived." Donovan stepped forward, face flushing with anger. "You said this place was secure, Moore. That no one knew about it." "It was secure," Richard snapped, momentarily dropping his composed facade. "She's bluffing. There are no videos." "Robert Donovan, regarding arrangements for my son Jerome's case," I quoted from the recording we'd just viewed. $5 million buys a lot of flexibility. Counselor." The color drained from Richard's face. For the first time in our 15-year relationship, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, quickly replaced by cold calculation. "Robert," he said, not looking at Donovan, "would you check upstairs? See what else they might have accessed?" As Donovan moved past us up the stairs, Richard maintained his position blocking the exit. "You've made a serious miscalculation, Emily. Whatever you think you've found, it won't matter. Not when you're arrested tomorrow for tampering with evidence, in multiple cases." "Including David Cruz?" I asked. Did he make a serious miscalculation too when he discovered you were framing innocent people? Richard's expression hardened. David made choices. As did you. My only choice was marrying someone I didn't really know, I replied. Someone who spent his career perverting the justice system he pretends to uphold. Heavy footsteps signaled Donovan's return. The office has been searched, he reported, face tight with barely controlled rage. Something was hidden in the lamp, and a picture frame's been tampered with. Richard's gaze locked with mine, the pretense of civility vanishing entirely. Where are they? The drive and whatever else you found? Already transmitted, Jang answered, speaking for the first time. To multiple recipients, including the State Attorney General and federal authorities. Copies being held by attorneys who will release everything if we don't check in hourly. It was partly a bluff. We'd sent the evidence to Veronica, but the rest of the distribution network was still being established. Richard, however, couldn't know that. Then I suppose we have a problem, Richard said quietly, because I can't let you leave here. In one fluid motion, he reached inside his jacket and withdrew a handgun. The movement was practiced, confident. Another hidden aspect of the man I'd thought I knew. Richard, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Think about what you're doing. Murder isn't something you can explain away with clever legal maneuvering. It won't be murder, he replied, his prosecutor's mind already constructing the narrative. It will be self-defense. I came to my lake house and discovered intruders. Fearing for my life, I defended myself. Given your increasingly erratic behavior, and the evidence of your crimes about to be discovered, it's entirely plausible. 2 against 1 isn't plausible, Jang countered. Richard's smile returned, cold and confident. Mr. Donovan won't be here when the police arrive, and it will be my word, the respected district attorney, against no one. Donovan shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of our arrangement, Moore. I paid for legal manipulation, not murder. Plans. Evolve, Richard said without looking away from us. And your son's freedom now depends on ensuring these two can't testify about what they found here. The tension in the stairwell was suffocating. Jang subtly shifted his weight, positioning himself slightly in front of me. I knew he was preparing to act, perhaps rush Richard despite the gun, but the narrow staircase offered no tactical advantage. There's another option, I said, desperately playing for more time. The evidence hasn't been widely distributed yet. We can make a deal, Richard laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Now you want to negotiate? What could you possibly offer that would be worth the risk of leaving you alive? Insurance, I answered. I have more evidence you don't know about from the attic lockbox. Your journal, Richard. 15 years of detailed records of your corruption. I've hidden copies where no one will find them unless I don't return. It was a calculated risk, revealing my knowledge of the journal. But I needed to shake Richard's confidence, make him uncertain about what else I might know. His eyes narrowed. You're lying. There's no journal. April 15th, I quoted from memory. Met with D. Sr. at cabin. Final arrangement. 2M initial deposit, 3M upon acquittal. Non-negotiable. Made it clear failure not an option. Richard's gun hand trembled slightly, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. Before he could respond, headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. We all froze, listening to car doors opening and closing, followed by footsteps on the gravel path. Richard? A woman's voice called from outside. Are you here? Your car's outside. I recognized the voice immediately. Eleanor Moore, Richard's mother. The timing was either miraculous intervention or catastrophic complication. Richard's face contorted with panic. Don't make a sound, he hissed, the gun still trained on us. To Donovan, he whispered urgently, Get upstairs. Stay out of Sight. As Donovan retreated, Richard backed toward the front door, positioning himself to intercept his mother before she could enter and discover the situation. The moment he turned, Jang moved with surprising speed, grabbing my arm and pulling me back up the stairs. We raced to the second floor, hearing Richard's forced cheerfulness as he greeted his mother at the front door. "Mom! What a surprise! What brings you here so late?" "Your father and I were having dinner with the Sullivans in Camden. They mentioned you might be using the lake house this weekend. Thought I'd stop by on our way home to make sure everything was in order." Her voice grew louder as she entered the house. I could picture Richard desperately trying to keep her in the entryway, away from where Donovan hid upstairs and where we had fled. "Now's our chance," Jang whispered. "Back bedroom has a balcony. We can climb down to the side yard and make it to the cars." We moved silently through the upstairs hallway, passing the room where Donovan had concealed himself. Through the partially open door, I caught his panicked gaze as we slipped past. The fear in his eyes told me he was now fully aware of how dangerous his partnership with Richard had become. The guest bedroom's French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the side garden. Jang went first, lowering himself over the railing and dropping the 10 feet to the ground below. I followed, Jang breaking my fall as I landed beside him. "Stop!" Richard's voice rang out from the balcony above as we started running toward the woods. The distinctive metallic click of his gun being cocked froze us in place. "Richard!" His mother's horrified voice came from behind him. "What are you doing with that gun? Who are these people?" "Go back inside, Mom," Richard ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This doesn't concern you." "That's Emily," Eleanor said, confusion evident in her voice. "Richard, explain yourself this instant." The momentary distraction was all we needed. Jang pulled me toward the cover of the trees as a gunshot cracked through the night air. Bark splintered from a tree trunk inches from my head. "Richard!" Eleanor screamed. "Have you lost your mind?" We ran through the forest, branches whipping at our faces in the darkness. Behind us, I could hear Eleanor's continued protests and Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to explain away what she had witnessed. Jang led us on a circuitous route back to our vehicles, ensuring we weren't being followed. As we reached the cars, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. "It's Veronica," he said, scanning the text. "The evidence has been received. She's already contacted her FBI connection and the State Attorney General's office. They're mobilizing. Now." "We need to get out of here," I urged, still processing the reality that my ex-husband had just tried to kill us. Richard won't let his mother stop him for long. Agreed. But we don't go back to the city, Jang decided. Too dangerous with Richard's police connections. We go directly to the state capital, to the Attorney General's office. They'll have jurisdiction over the district attorney. We drove, in convoy, taking back roads rather than the main highway where Richard might have officers waiting if he somehow got ahead of us. Jang maintained constant communication with Veronica, who was coordinating with authorities and securing the evidence we'd transmitted. 2 hours into our journey, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Jang's phone rang with news that changed everything. "State police just arrested Richard Moore at the lake house," Veronica reported, her voice trembling with excitement. "His mother called 911 after he fired at you. Apparently, Robert Donovan came downstairs during the commotion and she heard them arguing about evidence and payments. She recorded part of their conversation on her phone before Richard realized what she was doing. Eleanor turned him in?" I couldn't hide my shock. Richard's mother had always worshipped her son, defending him against any criticism. "She's giving a full statement now," Veronica confirmed, including details about previous cases Richard may have manipulated. Apparently, she's had suspicions for years but never wanted to believe the worst about her son. Seeing him fire a gun at his ex-wife was the breaking point. By noon, we had arrived at the State Attorney General's office where a team of prosecutors and investigators waited to take our statements. The evidence we'd gathered, combined with Eleanor's testimony and Donovan's subsequent cooperation in exchange for leniency, had created an ironclad case against Richard. Judge Sullivan had been taken into custody at his home, his chambers already being searched for additional evidence. Detective Harrison, upon learning of Richard's arrest, had come forward with information about the planned frame-up, seeking immunity in exchange for his testimony against Ward and others involved in the conspiracy. And Richard, the man who had spent decades manipulating the justice system, now found himself firmly in its grasp, charged with multiple counts of corruption, evidence tampering, conspiracy, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of a courtroom watching as Richard entered his final plea. Gone was the confident prosecutor in his tailored suit, replaced by a gaunt figure in prison orange, hands shackled at his waist. He glanced around the courtroom, his gaze briefly meeting mine before sliding away. His plea agreement admitted to 27 instances of corruption spanning 15 years, including the wrongful conviction of David Cruz, who had been released and exonerated the previous month. In exchange for providing evidence against a wider network of judicial corruption, Richard would serve 25 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence for a man of his age. As the bailiff led him away, I felt no joy, no vindication, only a profound sadness for the lives he had damaged, including my own. The man I had loved, had built a life with, had never truly existed. He had been a construct, a performance designed to advance Richard's ambitions while concealing his true nature. "Are you okay?" Veronica asked, joining me as the courtroom began to empty. In the months since Richard's arrest, we had developed an unexpected friendship, bonded by our shared experience of his betrayal. "I'm processing," I answered honestly. 15 years of my life were based on a lie. That takes time to reconcile. "Not everything was a lie," she said gently. "The corruption was real, the manipulation was real, but I think some of what you shared was real too in its way." "Perhaps," I conceded, "but it doesn't change the outcome." We walked together into the bright afternoon sunshine, where Tom Jang waited beside his car. He had become a regular presence in my life, at first as we prepared evidence for the prosecution, later as a friend and increasingly as something more. "The Attorney General's press conference is about to start," he informed us. "They're announcing the expanded investigation into judicial corruption across 3 counties. Your research methodology is being cited as instrumental in identifying the pattern, Emily." I smiled, thinking of the dissertation I had finally completed, fundamentally transformed by my experience, focusing on the psychology of long-term institutional corruption and methods for its detection. What had begun as academic research had become something far more personal and profound. "Ready to go?" Jang asked, opening the car door. "Yes," I said, taking one last look at the courthouse where Richard had once reigned as the embodiment of justice. "I'm ready to move forward." As we drove away, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a year. I had lost a husband, but found my voice. I had been targeted for destruction, but had instead exposed corruption that had poisoned the justice system for decades. I had been underestimated by a man who thought he knew everything about manipulation, only to discover I was a more formidable opponent than he could have imagined. Richard had tried to frame me, to make me the villain in his carefully constructed narrative. Instead, his own files, the meticulous records of his corruption that his ego couldn't resist keeping, had become the instrument of his downfall. Sometimes I realized the most dangerous adversary isn't the one who threatens and blusters, but the quiet observer who sees everything and waits for the precise moment to act, the basic wife, the calendar girl, the woman behind the man. Me. The end up next. You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.